back here on the show, former Browns and Eagles executive, to use the phrase I think that we've seen on TV. He knows a thing or two because he's seen a thing or two back here on the program. How are you, Joe?
I think today is the key word in the statement you just made.
So I don't even know where to start here. Let's just start, I guess, with what you thought of when you saw Mike Mayock's statement yesterday, Joe Banner.
Well, I had a mixture of sympathy. I had a rise in my own personal blood pressure, having lived through a somewhat similar situation. And I had a reaction like, how can you be surprised? So I had all three at once. I mean, people don't change their stripes, and we have an incredibly talented player who's extremely high maintenance, and that's who he is, and that's who he's going to be, and they shouldn't be surprised.
So what do you think the options are? Walk me through, the options if, in fact, Antonio Brown decides that he's all out because of a helmet issue that clearly it's difficult to see a way out of here. Joe, what happens?
Well, they can cut him. I mean, I haven't seen a player contract that ever doesn't require the player to report and practice, and I'm sure his contract requires that, and if he doesn't do that, they have the right to cut him, and they can claim that he was in default of the contract and his guarantees are voided. I'm sure there'd be a grievance, although at least on the surface it looks like the Raiders would have a pretty good case. They can give him what they call a 5-day letter, which requires him to kind of report and kind of no more nonsense, or the consequences that I just mentioned are even worse because he basically has to sit out for the season if he's not there in 5 days. And although he's there today, this could be, at least over in terms of his coming and leaving or not. We don't really know. Or they could just say, you know what, we knew what we were getting and we think the talent is worth it and we're going to put up with it. But they should not have any illusion that his reporting means everything's fine and now let's just get back to football. It's just not the way it goes.
Well, I was talking earlier, Joe, that, what if week 1 through 3 he's got 12 catches for 200 yards and 1 touchdown. Don't you think he'd blame the helmet as much as the scheme, potentially? I mean, I don't want to be negative here, but I try to be realistic, right?
Yeah, no, we're not seeing somebody who's kind of owning it, so to speak. I know Drew is kind of belittling this perspective, but there are 2,200-plus football players in camp right now wearing allowed helmets. He didn't have to leave, as you just said. He could have been there yesterday. He could have been trying a different helmet on the sideline. He could have been there last week. It's just kind of, petulance is really what it is. He was just, wasn't happy with the outcome, and so he took his ball and went home. I mean, you can't do that when you play professional football and you're under contract and you get paid a lot of money. And most importantly, you have a coaching staff of probably 20, 25 people and 89 players that are counting on you. You have to find a different way to manage your upsetness, and to think that the scenario you just described or any other won't kind of set him off is probably unrealistic. So, my worry is one of the lessons I learned in 20 years in the league, and especially in some of these situations, is you must mean what you say and say what you mean. So when Mayock said he's either all in or he's not, what does that mean? What is he going to do? Because if Antonio Bryant or Perfect or Incognito, some of the other challenging players that they signed this offseason, realize that they're all talk, and if you get enough talent, they'll put up with basically anything. That's going to turn into a crazy place to try to be a head coach and get everybody on the same page and be successful. So, I don't know what he meant. Like, what was he going to do? Was he going to cut him? I don't believe that. I really don't. And I don't think they're sending him a 5-day letter or anything else. But fortunately, he came back in for the moment, so they didn't get their, I'm going to use the word bluff called, so to speak. It was a dangerous position because he could have been exposed as somebody who doesn't mean what he says. And then once that happens, players will take advantage of the situation.
Joe Banner, former Eagles president, Browns front office executive here on the Rich Eisen Show. when you said did you get any flashbacks watching Drew Rosenhaus respond about a player not in camp with a lot of drama surrounding it, Joe? Did that take you back a days yesterday?
Yeah, well, I lived through T.O. and watched Drew in a similar position. What was most interesting to me about Drew, and where I really draw an analogy, when we were going through what we did with T.O. and we watched Drew on TV, we could actually tell that he wasn't sure what the player was going to do next. You knew what he was advising him to do. He knew what made sense to do, but you could tell he didn't completely have control of the player. And when I saw him talking today, and he was talking kind of in, I don't think this is going to go on long, and I can't promise, but I'm pretty sure he'll be there. But when you start using those pretty sure or I think language about your own client, you're telling people that you may know what's right, and we can probably tell what you're advising him, but you have no real idea if he's going to do what you think he should do. And, from a team's perspective, that's scary. You hope you get some people in a player's ear at a moment like this that are actually talking some sense to him and, will let what is in everybody's best interest happen. But I could tell that Drew is kind of himself worried about where this is headed, and probably very Antonio's there today.
Joe Banner, former Eagles president, here on the Rich Eisen Show. I mean, in terms of what you were talking about T.O., it's when Andy Reid and I'm assuming you and everybody got together and told T.O. to leave camp, and he wound up doing sit-ups on the front lawn. I remember we broke in live on NFL Network. We were just a baby of a network back then, and our minds were blown by it. I'm wondering what insight you have on the decision making that maybe the Raiders are going to have. You mentioned a bluff, if you will, of being all out with Antonio Brown, about the issues of putting a foot down with a player and the deliberations that go down for that, using your T.O. example with Drew Rosenhaus as I guess a guide.
Yeah, and Drew, as he suggested today, we were talking all the time. We just weren't agreeing. And as I said, it was obvious he didn't have control over the player. So a lot had led up to that. We had a meeting at the beginning of camp with Drew and T.O. and myself and Andy. It was intended to be a kind of clear the air meeting, but it didn't actually go that way. You may recall we had a series of interviews that T.O. had done where he had said things about Donovan McNabb that, we weren't okay with, Donovan wasn't okay with, his teammates weren't okay with, which is actually the straw that broke the camel's back. He did kind of another interview after having agreed privately that he would not say anything more publicly that would be divisive in the relationship between him and Donovan and the team. And, he did an interview that, we had no idea was coming, and then just came out, and we basically have an ultimatum. You either have to apologize, and you really have to mean it this time. You're not going to do it again. I have to leave. And he left, and that was the end of his Eagles career. He was suspended for the last 6 games of the year. We had a grievance. We actually prevailed in the grievance. He lost some signing bonus money and income that was due him that year. And then we moved on. But damage was left behind, from the situation. And players do feel the need to kind of take a side, and at the same time they're looking out for themselves. And, a player like Antonio Brown, a player like T.O., they're just so talented. They help lift the whole team, and so everybody feels like they're let down when they're not there. But my biggest lesson is what I said earlier. Don't get into a mode where you're making threats or talking tough unless you've agreed privately that you're going to back it up, because if they see some wiggle room, they will take it.
So, last one on this, Joe. You mentioned forfeiture language and cap hits or whatever. What would it be? I mean, you said there would be a grievance case that the Raiders could win. Again, we are extrapolating this out to the worst case scenario that may not happen because Brown's back in camp or with the team. The fact that Brown's with the team might not mean that he's gotten over the helmet issue. So let's just use this as an exercise for all of the fans of this show to take in. What do you mean by forfeiture language and the money that would be cost?
So the players have, and I've never seen a contract that didn't include this, very basic obligations in order to earn their pay or maintain guarantees on future money. And they start with things as simple as the player must report and the player must practice and play if healthy. Which is why I think we still hear Drew talking a little bit about the foot injury, because he's probably smart enough to realize then he may need to use that if they do get to this point. And, they could cut him and owe him nothing. They could claim that he has defaulted on the guarantee language, so they keep him and they pay him as they go, but he no longer has any guarantees. Remember, T.O., we were partway into the contract, so we'd already paid him. So we were actually in a position we could recover part of what we paid. I doubt that would be applicable in this situation, but he's risking all of the money that he has coming to him in the future contract. And at a minimum, he's risking all of the guarantees on that money. I mean, if I was the Raiders, I would certainly be arguing that you have no longer got this guaranteed money. Go through a whole legal process, file it with the league, give the player warnings, this whole series of steps you have to follow, so that if he continued to act up, even if he was in camp, I no longer have any guarantee obligations, which frankly turns the leverage from the player back to the team, so that you can now make demands. Once he's got $31 guaranteed $1 million, and you have no way out of that, a player can act very badly, and there's not a whole lot you can do about it. If he doesn't have those guarantees, which I would argue he's already taken action that from which the Raiders could at least get out of the guarantees, then the team has quite a bit of leverage, and the amount of money that they owe him and the risk he's taking, that he could see none of it. So the fact that he's in there, I suspect they won't want to rock the boat. They won't want to make an issue of this because, when you get a player around who you're worrying what they're going to do next, you try not to provoke them. But they may look back and regret that next week or a month into the season, depending upon what's happening.
Last one for you, Joe Banner, before I let you go. You got any sense of what's going on with the Cowboys and Zeke and Dak right now? I mean, less than 3 weeks to go now until the Giants show up in the Jones Mahal for week 1. What do you think?
Isn't the who's Zeke? Isn't that where we're at now?
You heard that one, huh? But then he did follow it up by saying that Tony Pollard would be a great compliment for Zeke when Zeke comes back. He did say that after all the laughter subsided.
He was smart enough to realize that he better make sure it was obvious he was joking. I think Zeke gets done. I think Zach gets done. I said this to you the last time we spoke. The only way Dak doesn't get done if he's really decided he wants to be the next Kirk Cousins, play a year, take a couple of tags, take the risk on his performance and his health, and then try to be a young quarterback and really hit the mark and just see what the value would be. In this case, that would make me a little bit nervous. I think you better make sure you have a talented player that's likely to have a decent amount of demand before you take that chance. And I like Prescott, but I'm not sure he's quite at that level. Maybe a little bit better to take the sure thing at this point. But we don't really know exactly what he's asking for or what they're offering. I wouldn't do that if I didn't feel like it's at least in the range of fair. But I still think they get these deals done. This is their history. They're patient. When they need to get a deal done, they get them done. And I think we'll see both those guys happy here in the next about 3 weeks.
Joe, thanks for the time. Really appreciate it. Always enjoy our chats. We'll chat again soon.
My pleasure. Take it easy.
Right back at you. At Joe Banner 13 on Twitter.
For more of The Rich Eisen Show, tune to Audience Channel 239 on DirecTV for free on BR Live or download the Rich Eisen Show app.